Good Monday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for August the 21st. Today, we are reading together in 2 Samuel chapter 19, which is the aftermath of David's saga with the mutiny and the coup that was carried out by his son Absalom. He is now dead. He has been killed by Joab and his armor bearers, even after David had told them to please be gentle with his son. David, no doubt, within this entire sequence of events, has felt a tremendous amount of guilt, knowing that so much of this goes back to his own poor decision making. Sure, it is very true that Absalom made decisions for himself, and he would be held accountable for those decisions. But David does feel a sense of guilt, I believe, because he knows that much of what is going on goes all the way back to chapter 11, where he sinned with Bathsheba, and because of that, there would be the consequences of the sword never departing from his house. There's going to be constant turmoil from here on out. Yahweh even speaks about giving his wives to his neighbor, and we have seen within this story previously that Absalom had taken David's concubines for himself in a tent on top of the the palace's roof. So all these things, again, that Yahweh promised would be consequences have come about. And David, as he's been going through all of this horrible chapter in his life, surely has just felt awful about it. We saw that yesterday, reading in chapter 18, where David was deeply moved hearing about the death of his son Absalom, and that's going to continue on here into chapter 19. So let me get the text of 2 Samuel 19 up on the screen, and we'll read along together here. 2 Samuel chapter 19, verse number 1. 2 Samuel chapter 19, verse number 1, it was reported to Joab, the king is weeping. He's mourning over Absalom. And that day's victory was turned into mourning for all the troops, because on that day the troops heard the king is grieving over his son. So they returned to the city quietly that day, like troops come in when they are humiliated after fleeing in battle. But the king covered his face and cried loudly, "My son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house of to the king and said, "Today you have shamed all your soldiers, those who saved your life, as well as your sons, your wives, and your concubines, by loving your enemies and hating those who love you. Today you have made it clear that the commanders and soldiers mean nothing to you. In fact, today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us that were dead, it would be fine with you. Now get up, go out, and encourage your soldiers. For I swear by Yahweh that if you don't go out, not a man will remain with you tonight. This will be worse for you than all the trouble that has come to you from your youth until now." So the king got up and sat in the city gate, and all the people were told, "Look, the king is sitting in the city gate." Then they all came into the king's presence. Meanwhile, each Israelite had fled to his tent, and people throughout all the tribes of Israel were arguing amongst themselves, saying, "The king rescued us from the grasp of our enemies, and he saved us from the grasp of the Philistines. But now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, the man we appointed over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about restoring the king?" King David sent word to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to restore the king to his place? The talk of all Israel has reached the king at his house. You are my brothers, my flesh and blood. Why should you be the last to restore the king? Tell Amasa, aren't you my flesh and blood? May God punish me and do so severely if you don't become commander of my army from now on instead of Joab." So he won over all the men of Judah, and they unanimously sent word to the king, "Come back, you and all your servants." Then the king returned. When he arrived at the Jordan, Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and escort him across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men from Benjamin with him. Ziba, an attendant from the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, also rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king. They forded the Jordan to bring the king's household across and do whatever the king desired. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell face down before the king and said to him, My lord, don't hold me guilty, and don't remember your servant's wrongdoing on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. But look, today I'm the first one of the entire house of Joseph to come down to meet my lord the king. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, asked, Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? Because he cursed Yahweh's anointed. David answered, the sons of Zeruiah, do we agree on anything? Have you become my adversary today? Should any man be killed in Israel today? Am I not aware that today I'm king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, You will not die. Then the king gave him his oath. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet, trimmed his mustache, or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, Mephibosheth, why didn't you come with me? Oh, my lord the king, he replied, my servant Ziba betrayed me. Actually, your servant said, I'll saddle the donkey for myself so that I may ride it and go with the king, for your servant is lame. Ziba slandered your servant to my lord the king. Though my lord the king is like the angel of God, so do whatever you think best. For my grandfather's entire family deserves death from my lord the king, but you have set your servant among those who eat at your table. So what further right do I have to keep on making appeals to the king? The king said to him, Why keep on speaking about these matters of yours? I hereby declare, you and Ziba are to divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, Instead, since my lord the king has come to his palace safely, let Ziba take it all. Barzillai, the Gileadites, had come down from Rogelim and accompanied the king to the Jordan River to see him off at the Jordan. Barzillai was a very old man, 80 years old, and since he was a very wealthy man, he had provided for the needs of the king while he stayed at Mahanaim. The king said to Barzillai, Cross over with me, and I'll provide for you at my side in Jerusalem. Barzillai replied to the king, How many years of my life are left that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I'm now 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or drinks? Can I still hear the voice of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Since your servant is only going with the king a little way across the Jordan, why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please let your servant return, so that I may die in my own city near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant, Chimham. Let him cross over with my lord. Do for him what seems good to you. The king replied, Chimham will cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. And whatever you desire from me, I will do for you. So the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed. The king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and Barzillai returned to his home. The king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went with him. All the troops of Judah and half of Israel's escorted the king. But suddenly all the men of Israel came to the king. They asked him, Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, take you away secretly and transport the king and his household across the Jordan along with all of David's men? All the men of Judah responded to the men of Israel, Because the king is our relative. Why does this make you angry? Have we ever eaten anything of the king's or been honored at all? The men of Israel answered the men of Judah, We have 10 shares in the king, so we have a greater claim to David than you. Why then do you despise us? Weren't we the first to speak of restoring our king? But the words of the men of Judah were harsher than those of the men of Israel. And that is 2 Samuel chapter 19. The end of the chapter there is going to show up a bit more in the next chapter, in chapter 20. But to go back and to look at this text, chapter 19, it carries on from what we see at the end of chapter 18, where David is just distraught over the death of his son Absalom. Again, I think probably guilt has a lot to do with that, on top of just being the death of a child, which is certainly nothing that a parent would ever want to endure. But it is David's grieving that has a major impact upon the people. The troops, instead of being joyous in their victory, come in very solemn and sullen. So much so that Joab actually, he rebukes David very strongly. He sees what David is doing as self-centered grief, and his grief is causing a great negative consequence upon his troops. Today, you have made it clear that the commanders and the soldiers mean nothing to you. In fact, today, this is verse number 6, I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, it would be fine with you. That's a harsh word, but it seems to be a truthful word. David, he was not weighing the situation well. There were so many people who had risked their lives for him, people who had died for him. And yet he ignored all of that, didn't show appreciation for that, and instead mourned over his son, who was a rebel, who hated him and tried to kill him. Certainly, I think the words of Joab here, the messenger isn't the favorite. He's not a great guy. We've seen that on a number of occasions. But the message that he brings seemed to be a true and a right one. So David does get up, and he ends up going to the city gate. Because if not, as Joab said, we're all going to leave you and you're going to be by yourself. Well, after David kind of rights himself and gets back into a good place, we see that Israel is the first to restore David as king. David doesn't just take over the throne and demand it. He wants the people to recognize him as king, because he doesn't want to rule a people who do not desire for him to be their king. Israel first does this, and then David has to encourage, kind of nudge Judah to do the same thing in verses 11 through 13. And one of the things he does too is he makes Amasa the new commander of his army over Joab, although we're going to see how that plays out here in the near future as well. David ends up winning over the men of Judah, and they unanimously send word to the king that they would be his servants and that he should be their king. One of the other people he interacts with is Shimei, the son of Gera. Remember the guy that was throwing rocks and throwing curses at David as he was on the run toward Mahanaim. We see him showing up again, and this time his attitude and his demeanor, his message is a lot different. To begin with, the first time we saw him, again, throwing rocks, cursing David, but now he comes with very, very serious repentance. He knows that he's in trouble because this man who he cursed and who he spoke about as being glad that these things were happening to him, he's come out on the right side of this battle and this struggle. And he knows now that he's in power again, and that seems to be trouble. But I mean, if we're going to take him at his word, if we will take him genuinely what he says, he repents here, and he says that he is sorry for what he has done. And he shows that he says, listen, I have sinned, but look, I'm the first one here to greet you. I'm the first one to come to meet you. Again, showing a bit of fruit of repentance, possibly. Now, Abishai, one of the sons of Zeruiah, David's sister, he's just ready to whack somebody. He is ready to kill anybody that he can. So he stands up, tells David, listen, let's take him out. But David says, no more dying today. No one needs to die in Israel today. I forgive him. He is forgiven of what he has done. He tells Shimei, you will not die. And then the king gave him his oath. David, as well, thinking about this, might be keeping in mind the kindness that he vowed and swore to his brother, his friend, Jonathan, and also what he had promised to David as well in the past. So that might be part of what's going on here as well, in David extending this kindness. The next individual David shows up or comes face to face with is Mephibosheth. Remember, Ziba had come to David while he was on the run and said that, Mephibosheth stayed back in Jerusalem because he's going to make a play for the throne. He thinks that it's time to get the throne back for the family of Saul. So David asks him in verse 25, hey, Mephibosheth, why didn't you come with me? And Mephibosheth answers, he says, well, it's because Ziba betrayed me. He acted like he was going to go get the horse or the donkey for me, and then he took off. He lied to me. He slandered me to you. But I know that you have good judgment, which, I mean, for the most part, I guess that's true about David. It's ironic that here Mephibosheth claims that David has good judgment whenever it was David's judgment. Once he heard what Ziba said, that Mephibosheth had betrayed him. So maybe David's judgment isn't as good as Mephibosheth makes it out to be. But here still Mephibosheth shows trust in David's judgment. And he says, you'll do the right thing. I'll be ready to go with whatever. So the king says, no big deal. You and Ziba, you just divide the land. But Mephibosheth gives a little foreshadowing here to a probably pretty well-known story involving Solomon and 2 women and a baby, where he says, no, just let Ziba have all of it. Mephibosheth is content with his lot. He is content with simply being able to eat at the king's table. And he says, that is enough for me. And again, probably shows the fact that Mephibosheth truly is the one telling or being honest here in this particular situation. Next, David interacts with Barzillai, who is a Gileadite, who was a rich man, an old man, but a rich man. He was one of the ones that had really provided for David at Mahanaim. David invites him to come and to live with him in the palace so he can provide for him for the kindness that he had shown him on the run. And yet Barzillai says, no, I'm kind of old. The food doesn't really as delectable as it used to be. I can't really hear all the good entertainment, and it just wouldn't be worth it for me. So why don't you instead take my servant Kimham to go and to be my replacement. Let him be the one that you show kindness to. And David says, fine, we'll do that instead. Again, Barzillai just showing the type of character that he has. And it's good for David to surround himself with these type of people, really keep him steady, keep him in a good mindset. Because you see what happens whenever David's surrounded with people like, like Joab, not very good. But Barzillai seems to be a good influence upon him. Now, once we get to the end of the chapter, we see trouble beginning to show itself, where we have the beginnings of some civil disturbance, where we have Israel versus Judah. Israel says, hey, we have just as much claim to David as you do, Judah. You're sitting here acting like he's all yours, but we're the one that restored him first. In fact, we have 10. We have 10 shares in the king. We have 10 tribes. You just have you. So why do you think that you get David all to yourself? Why do you think you get to honor David and be honored by David? And Judah says, well, first of all, he's our relative, but it's not like we've taken advantage of the situation at all. What's the big deal? Well, Israel tries to speak up, but the text tells us that the words of the men of Judah were harsher than those of the men of Israel. So what we have here at the end of the chapter is tension beginning to grow between these two halves of Israel. And again, as we move into the next chapter, we're going to see that a lot of this issue continues to grow, because there's somebody here. His name is Sheba, son of Bichri, who happened to be there, and he blew the ram's horn and shouted, we have no portion in David, no inheritance in Jesse's son, each man to his tent Israel. And boom, it's all about to kick off again. So we'll notice this tomorrow as we read through chapter 20. If you have any questions or comments about chapter 19, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. We see a lot of things again in David's past coming back to cause a bit of issues for him. But you got to handle things. Even once you make a mistake, one thing to take away from this chapter is once you make a mistake, you cannot go back and fix it. You cannot dwell upon that. You simply have to take it as it comes and do the best you can moving forward. David made a mistake with his sons, but he couldn't change that. And him grieving to the point of discouraging his people, that wasn't helpful. He needed to move on. Grieve, yes, but not to the point of hurting others. David's poor decision-making with Ziba, without hearing Mephibosheth's side, making that rash judgment. That mistake was made. But you know what he tried to do here? He tried to do the best he can to rectify it. And that's really what we have to do. Yes, we're going to make mistakes, but we just need to do the best we can moving forward to not compound those mistakes and make them worse than they even were previously. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And we'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading together from 2 Samuel chapter 20. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday, everyone. Take care and God bless.